Hello and welcome back to reaDIYsteaDIY. If it's your first time here, thank you for joining us. If you've already subscribed, thank you for subscribing. Well, today I'd like to talk about cross-threading. Cross-threading happens when you put a fastener of some kind, be it a bolt or a screw, into a pre-drilled hole, which is supposed to receive the threads of the fastener perfectly, but because you were in a rush, because you weren't paying attention, you put the fastener in on an angle, and you perpetrate what is known as angular cross-threading. You start turning the screw before the threads are aligned with the threads in the hole, and the bolt or the screw enters the threaded part misaligned angularly, the threads of the hole and the screw or the bolt engage incorrectly, and then the threads fail by shearing. In other words, you're grinding new threads where there already were threads. You end up getting your bolt or your screw stuck, you end up destroying the pre-drilled hole, and that can be a real problem if you're trying to fasten two things together and you're relying on that fastener. So there's a couple of really easy ways you can avoid doing this, and we're going to go over those today. So let's get into it. Before we can talk about cross-threading properly, we have to talk about what is a screw or a bolt. A screw, a bolt, a fastener of that nature is actually one of the most simple machines in existence. It's considered a machine because screws or bolts or fasteners like that change a gentle turning force into a strong force forwards into the material into which you are inserting them. Each time you turn the screw or the bolt, even just a little, the threads pull it forward into the hole or the material that you're trying to fasten them to. The threads actually amplify the amount of force you're putting on the head of the screw or the bolt. So if you're turning it with your fingers, you're turning it with a screwdriver, or you're turning it with a wrench, the amount of force you put on the head of that screw or bolt is magnified through the many threads of the shank of that bolt or screw into that forwards motion. This is a real blessing. If you're trying to screw a screw into a piece of wood and you haven't pre-drilled or whatever it is, it makes it possible to push a screw into a piece of wood where it otherwise wouldn't be possible. The problem comes when you're trying to put that screw or that bolt, that fastener, into a pre-drilled hole, and you're trying to do it too quickly. The threads are designed to mesh perfectly, but for some reason you don't quite line them up right. You apply the fastener to the hole in a slightly angular direction. You don't get it exactly right, and you start screwing anyway. The amplified force can cause an accident to happen inside the hole. The helical grooves on the thread of the fastener aren't matched up with the grooves on the inside of the hole. You drive it in anyway, and you start making new grooves. This is a real problem. You can get your fastener stuck, you can destroy the hole, and if you're relying on that hole to be there, it can be a real problem. There's a few things you can do to make sure that this doesn't happen to you in the future. One, you can make sure that your fastener is clean. If the fastener has rust on it or dirt on it, something caked on, baked on, there's a very good chance that that can derail the process of meshing the threads of the hole with the threads of the fastener. So just make sure it's clean before you stick it in the hole. Next step is to start with your fingers. Your fingers are going to translate to your brain much more information, much quicker than any tool. The tool can fool you into thinking that you've got the threads matched up properly when you really don't. So start with your fingers. Make sure you've got it all lined up properly. Make sure it feels happy. Then you can go to your tool. But the third and most important tip for avoiding cross-threading is this. Start by turning the screw the wrong way. I know it seems counterintuitive, and when you're in a rush, it literally is the last thing you're ever going to think of. But if it's a critical screw and a critical hole, and you do not want to cross-thread it and mess it up, this is a good idea. Put the screw in the hole. Turn it counterclockwise, the opposite direction that you want to in order to tighten the screw. Keep turning until you feel a little click. The little click is an indicator that the start of the thread of the hole and the start of the thread on the fastener are lined up. That's what clicked. Then you change direction, turn your tool or use your fingers to turn the fastener in a clockwise manner, and the thread's gonna go in the hole properly pretty much every time. It's very hard to mess it up if you turn it counterclockwise first and wait for the click. Cross-threading can happen when you have any bolt or any screw, whether you're attaching a wheel to a vehicle, or you're rehanging a door and you're putting your screw back into the hinge holes, or like in this case where I'm putting the mount on a lens. This is actually a really good one for cross-threading. Many people make a mistake here. There's a couple of gotchas. First gotcha, the screw is very small. So the threads are very small. A higher thread frequency, more threads, means a more likely chance that you're going to cross-thread. Coarse-threaded screws tend to do it less than fine-threaded screws. These screws are tiny and very fine-threaded. I definitely don't want to cross-thread these, I rely on these 8 tiny little screws to hold all of that weight and all the value of this lens to the camera. I need to make sure the holes work and the screws are doing their job properly. This is an excellent time to practice cross-threading safety. I put the screw into the hole, I rotate it counterclockwise, I hear a click. All right, I can screw it in. Incidentally, anytime you are trying to attach a flat surface to another flat surface using multiple fasteners like this, one great way to avoid cross-threading on the last screw is to kitty corner when you're applying the screws. That is to say, don't put in screws right next to each other. In this case, I have 8 screws to apply the lens mount to the lens. I would not start with the screw and then move over to the screw next to it and then do the screw next to that. I would not work my way around these 8 screws in a clockwise or counterclockwise manner. I would partially insert one screw on one side, and then I would go to the other side of the lens and put in the opposite screw, again partially. Back to the first side, partially put in a screw, then put in the screw opposite to that one partially. Then I would finish off the last 4 screws in the same manner. Then I would tighten those screws that I put in partially in the same order as before. Start with the screw I put in first, tighten that one down, then tighten the opposite screw to that. Move back to the first side, tighten down the third screw I put in, then tighten the screw opposite to that. That way the two surfaces, the flat surface of the lens mount and the flat surface of the lens, approach each other as I tighten these screws as parallel to each other as I can get them. If I worked my way around and reefed down one side before getting to the other side to even start, I would be applying the lens mount to the lens crooked, and that's inviting the last screw to go in crooked, which can lead to cross-threading. You'll avoid that if you do the kitty corner method as opposed to the clockwise or counterclockwise method of attaching the fastener. The same thing applies when you have any 2 flat surfaces that you want to meet flush and you're using multiple fasteners to do that. If you're putting a wheel back on a vehicle, my owner's manual recommends this, not this. If you're putting your ColecoVision back together after doing a small repair or cleaning it up, putting the screws back in this order is a better idea than putting the screws back in this order. So look, in the end, cross-threading is something that almost anybody can do at almost any time. If you're not careful, if you're not thinking, sometimes it just happens. The damage caused by cross-threading is not irreparable. There are tools that can help you reestablish the threads on the shank of a bolt or in the hole of a receiver. We'll go over those in another video. But hey, if you're careful and you never cross-thread anything, you may never need them. So I hope that helped you out. If it did, please feel free to like or subscribe. Hitting that thumbs up button and subscribing really helps the channel and I'd really appreciate it. If you've already subscribed, feel free to leave a comment. Comments help me make the channel better, and that's what I'm after. So until next week, take care, stay safe, have fun with your DIY projects, whatever you got going on, and I'll see you next Saturday.